Wandavision is bad. Season 1, Episode 8, although in fairness, this episode is probably better than some of the last few for a couple of different reasons. First, it gets rid of the stupid gimmicky sitcom nonsense, and second, there's almost nothing woke in this episode. I don't think there's anything, actually. It's amazing how much better a show or a movie can be without the woke garbage dragging it down.
Groovy.
That's not to say that all of the problems have been removed. This episode, like all the others, does seem to drag things out in order to stretch the episode length, but besides that, it's, for the most part, a solid episode. We start with a flashback of Agatha Harkness. There's a little bit of a trick in this opening scene that I thought was actually kind of clever. It shows us in this flashback that it takes place in Salem, Massachusetts in 1693, and Agatha is being tied to a post and charged with witchcraft. The immediate assumption is that she's being executed for being a witch by some kind of religious zealots or something. The truth is that she's being executed by her own witch's coven. They charge her with using forbidden magic, which is ironically similar to the general charge of just being a witch and using magic in general. But as the other witches begin to use their power, we see that Agatha is much stronger than the rest of the witches. She's able to turn their own magics against them and drain their life, including the witch that's in charge, which turns out to be Agatha's own mother. So far, so good. This is probably the best opening scene of the entire series. Back in the present day, we learn that Wanda has been rendered powerless while she's inside Agatha's house, and this is because Agatha has placed warding spells throughout the building that will prevent anyone except her from using magic. Agatha makes fun of Wanda for not knowing about this, as she considers it to be something that would be extremely basic for a magic user. Agatha is under the impression that Wanda is an extremely powerful witch, and she reveals that Pietro, that we've been seeing in the show, was essentially an illusion. Agatha was unable to use the real Pietro's body because it was on the other side of the world. Agatha is incredibly impressed with the level of power that Wanda has been displaying throughout the town, and wants to know how it's done. But the problem is that Wanda has absolutely no idea how she's doing it. Since Agatha believes that Wanda is an incredibly powerful witch who's simply refusing to tell her the secrets, Agatha decides that the best way to learn is to force Wanda to relive certain events from her life, and then Agatha can kind of steal the information. Wanda initially refuses, but then Agatha threatens to harm the twins. We know that Wanda and her brother got their powers from the Mind Stone, but it seems like the show is going to expand on that, or more appropriately, they're going to retcon some of it.
How embarrassing.
In the first location they go to, Wanda revisits her early childhood. We meet her father and mother, and her father is depicted as being a loving, hardworking man trying to take care of his family. And the reason why I point this out is because it's almost unheard of in modern Hollywood, who almost always treats fathers as deadbeats or bumbling idiots. After all, look at what Disney did to Han Solo. We find out that Wanda's father is a traveling salesman who sells DVDs, and it's from these DVDs, which is where Wanda gets the idea for all the different versions and styles of the town of Westview that we've seen in previous episodes. There's a quick view outside their apartment where we can see that the area is in turmoil and war, but they try to ignore this and the family enjoys a night together. They watch an episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show called It May Look Like a Walnut. That episode dealt with one of the characters watching a scary movie and believing that aliens might actually come to Earth because they're angry with humans trying to get into space. This obviously ties into the creation of S.W.O.R.D. While the organization of S.H.I.E.L.D. is meant to deal with Earth-based threats, S.W.O.R.D. deals with things from space as a direct result of what happened with Thanos. It seems like they're kind of hinting here that there's going to be a lot of problems that arrive from humans going into space in the MCU. This may also relate to people going into the multiverse, which is something that we know is going to happen in the next Doctor Strange movie, and Wanda is supposed to have a big part of that. While the family is watching the show, their building is destroyed and Wanda's parents are killed. There's also a bomb that gets dropped into the apartment. In the present day, Agatha asks about it, thinking that Wanda used some sort of spell called a probability hex, but Wanda says that it was just defective and never went off. Agatha creates another door that takes Wanda to a different part of her life. This time, it's when she was working with Hydra and came into contact with the Mind Stone. The Hydra agents running the test claim that all of the other test subjects have died, but obviously that doesn't happen with Wanda. This is a change that they made from the comics, and it's annoyed me ever since the first time that I saw it introduced in the MCU. With the Infinity Stones in the comics, anyone can wield them and it will just amplify their abilities. However, in the MCU, touching the stones will end up destroying the person, and it's really dumb and inconsistent. Because if you touch the Power Stone, then it will destroy you. And apparently now we just learned that if you touch the Mind Stone, it will also destroy you. But that doesn't happen with the Time Stone, it didn't happen with the Reality Stone, it didn't happen with the Soul Stone. I mean, it's just inconsistent and dumb, and they just made this rule up so that certain people can't use this. It makes no sense, and it's dumb, and it was an unnecessary change from the comics.
This is terrible.
Regardless, Wanda manages to survive, and she also gets a quick look at another figure through the energy of the Mind Stone, which appears to be a future version of Wanda. And it looks like Wanda when she's wearing her comic book outfit. And while this might seem kind of neat, again, it doesn't make any sense. Because this is the Mind Stone. It doesn't have any ability whatsoever to look into the future to see what Wanda will eventually become. It can only show her who she is or read the minds of others and kind of control the minds of others. It doesn't have the ability to look into the future like this. So it's like, yeah, it's a neat little thing that they added, but it doesn't make sense and it's dumb.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Agatha concludes that Wanda was born with the ability to use magic, but never had any sort of formal training, and as a result, it would have just went away over time. But because she came into contact with an Infinity Stone, it amplified the powers and allows her to use them without any kind of training. Agatha then brings Wanda to another place in her history, and this is where she and Vision were living in the Avengers facility during Captain America Civil War. The two of them are watching a sitcom, and it appears that one of the characters in the show gets injured, and Vision asks if it's considered funny because the character was suffering from injury. But Wanda replies that no, it's funny because everyone knows that the character is not going to get hurt, because it's a sitcom and it's not that kind of a show. Essentially, what they're trying to say here is that with sitcoms, no one ever really gets hurt, and nothing ever has any lasting impact. The bad things that happen during the episode will go away, and everything will be fine and okay by the time that episode is over, which is kind of what's happening with Wanda's version of the Westview town, where it's a sitcom, and regardless of whatever problems they have, it all goes away by the end of the day. But there seems to be a greater implication here that the Wandavision series is not going to be like that, and it's going to do the opposite, where the bad things just don't go away, they stay permanent. And this is likely going to have to do with Vision's death, and that Wanda is going to have to finally end up learning to live with it by the time the series is over. But for right now, she definitely hasn't learned to live with it. And at this point, Agatha realizes that Wanda, not able to deal with Vision's death, took some sort of drastic action and brings her to another place, and this is going to be right after Wanda was returned from the snap, and Wanda goes over to the S.W.O.R.D facility in order to track down Vision's body. Once there, she forces her way through the building and meets with the director. She wants to take Vision's body and have him buried. While this is a very sentimental thing to do, it's also incredibly stupid.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Because Vision's body is made from vibranium, and it would be only a matter of time before someone found it and dug it up. Doesn't matter how hard they tried to hide it, they have all different kinds of sensors and things that we've already seen shown in this very series that can track vibranium, especially larger amounts of it, so someone would eventually find Vision's grave and they would dig him up. The best case scenario would be that he would just get melted down and they would reuse or sell the vibranium, or the worst case scenario would be that they use the technology in Vision to create new weapons. And this is why Vision's body is being dismantled. And the director says all of this in kind of a roundabout way, but Wanda is still initially angry, but later she does come to the realization that this is what needs to happen, and she leaves the building. We then learn that Vision had mailed Wanda a letter before he died, and he had also purchased a plot of land where he and Wanda could live together. this new home was located in the town of Westview. Upon arriving at the location, Wanda has a breakdown and loses control of her powers. The entire town is altered with her reality warping magic, and she also recreates Vision using what appears to be residual power from the Mind Stone. So the Vision that we've been seeing in the TV show is not actually the physical body of Vision from the movies. It's an entirely brand new manifestation created from Wanda's powers, and this likely is why Vision's body began to break down when he left the energy field. Back in the present, Wanda's alone in the house and runs outside to find Agatha using her magic to hold the twins captive. She then explains that Wanda is supposed to be a myth, a magic user so powerful that she's capable of creating existence from nothing. Agatha says that this is known as chaos magic and that Wanda is a Scarlet Witch. So for the first time in the entire MCU, Wanda is finally called by her comic book name of Scarlet Witch. However, the way that Agatha uses it more as a title for anyone that is able to control chaos magic. They are Scarlet Witches, whereas Wanda will become the Scarlet Witch. So this might have to do with the fact that when Wanda was introduced into the MCU, Fox Studios still had ownership over a lot of the Marvel characters, including mutants like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, which is why the MCU had to use different versions of them and had them get their powers from a different source instead of being mutants. But now that Disney has full ownership of the vast majority of those characters, they can now use the proper comic book names and kind of do whatever they want with it. However, that's not where the episode ends. There's also a mid-credit scene, just like in a lot of the movies, and it shows the director. He talks about how they had a project that they could never get to work properly. However, now they have energy from Wanda because of the drone that she had damaged, and then she dragged it out of the energy field and she kind of threw it back at him. It was still infused with all of her powers. So now they use that power in order to activate a project, and that project turns out to be Vision. However, in the comics, this is known as White Vision.
That's racist.
There are already a huge amount of differences in how the White Vision was created in the comics versus how they're doing it in the show. But one of the main things about the White Vision character that they're probably going to carry over is that he had no memories of his previous life, and he also has no feelings for Wanda or the twins. Eventually, he does regain a lot of this, but for a very long time, he is separate from Wanda and really doesn't want anything to do with her. In the MCU, it's likely that White Vision will be weaker than he was before, since he no longer has access to the Mind Stone, and he's also probably going to be a kind of temporary villain while he's under the control of S.W.O.R.D, though eventually he will likely gain some sort of awareness and go off and do his own thing. It's clear that the main purpose of this episode was to retcon the Wanda character. Rather than just getting her powers from the Mind Stone, now we're supposed to believe that she always had the ability to use magic, and the Mind Stone just made it stronger. Of course, that doesn't explain why her powers were limited to just kind of moving stuff around for a very long time, and then suddenly and instantly it changed into reality warping powers. They could have easily worked some of this into the previous movies, where there could have been small hints that Wanda had a little part of reality warping power. Maybe like a little tiny thing that just kind of changes or gets altered in some way or another that really doesn't have any impact on the story. It's just kind of something that people would notice. Like, we as the audience could have noticed it, but the characters in the movie wouldn't have.
I'm writing this down. This is good stuff.
And therefore it wouldn't have changed the story in any way. That would have been much better than just flipping a switch and saying, well, now she has a completely different set of powers because she was really sad.
I made myself sad.
Next week is the final episode of WandaVision Season 1, but the rumor is that there isn't going to be a second season, that the entire purpose of the show is merely to set up several of the movies that will be arriving in Phase 4 and some of the other programs, but there's not really any intent to continue the WandaVision series as it is now, because everything that we know about Wanda is going to be happening in the new Doctor Strange movie. I guess we'll have to wait and see for all that, and if there's any big surprises in the finale of WandaVision. But for now, that is the end of Episode 8.